Hi everyone from Giaco. After living over a decade in Finland, I decided to help building a bridge between the English-speaking people living in Finland and the local community. Listen to my podcast to discover the most interesting and incredible people from Finland and to dig into Finnish culture and controversial issues that impact all of us in our daily life. And now sit back and enjoy listening. Bye! Hi everyone. The following is a conversation with Emil Kastehelmi and Helin, who are two analysts from OSINT, meaning Open Source Intelligence, specialized in war affairs and Ukraine war situation. With them we talk about the evolving of the war from the beginning to the present. We talk about Finland's position in these sensitive times and how propaganda and information is affecting the development of the war to an unpredictable outcome. Please enjoy. Hi, we have here Emil and Jon. Hi guys, how are you?
Hi, I'm great, thanks. Yeah, me too. It is a bit windy. It is a bit too cold to be the 1st of May, but...
Yeah, we have had snow in May, so maybe we are still positive. So I invited you to talk about the situation between Russia and Ukraine. Let's see if we can call it a war and what is the meaning of it. But if you can start maybe telling something each of you about yourself and like how do you define yourself?
Yeah, so hello, and I would define myself as a person who is making his living out of the wars that are going at the moment or have gone before. So I do journalism on the war in Ukraine, and then also I work in open source intelligence, and on top of that I also do military history. So I work as a military history expert, writing books and doing some TV shows and working with museums and so on.
Yes, you've been noticed also. You've been giving a lot of interviews also on the national TV. So your knowledge is quite deep.
Yes, I've been talking about both subjects during these recent months.
So it has been a passion for long. It is something you live.
Yeah, yes. I've found history and especially military history very interesting from a very young age. So that's something that has been one of my interests, and it's good that it's also now part of my actual work that I get actual income from. So that's always good.
Yeah. If work and passion, they go together hand in hand, that's the best. So
yes.
Congratulations. And Jon, what can you tell us about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a lot of the same except for the history part, which I mean, that just might basically make my job, war profiteering at this point, but I'm a fact checker for the Helsingin Sanomat newspaper, and I'm also acting as their sort of expert on the war in Ukraine. I am also doing OSINT. That is sort of where this all kind of got started for the two of us, and then sort of otherwise I am a huge nerd, which I think is the main thing for me, not the war. But it's sort of nice to be paid for being a huge nerd, because drawing maps, studying maps, studying the war is just basically like this big. I mean, all of these sort of analysts that I've met during this war, all of them are huge nerds, and it's been very, very interesting. Somehow, sort of the social media aspect and looking into the data, also the maps sort of tend to draw in nerds. So getting paid for my passions is very nice.
Yeah. Did you know each other before, or when did you get to know each other?
We actually met each other in the reserve officer school. So we've been both doing our military service at the same time, and then we both went and became intelligence officers.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's also something that now that we make the open source intelligence based map service, for example, and do journalism and fact checking on the war. So these all things tie together.
Yeah. It's like we have known for almost 9 years now.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, being like in more intense contact, sometimes less. And then when the like war was coming around, we could sort of see the news coming up of the like Russian buildup. We just sort of through these messages, each like other end just went, "Hey, what's happening? Do we want to look into this?" And it just sort of grew out of that.
Okay, now you called it a war. So let's define what is a war.
Well, I don't have a textbook one, but I mean, we have two large industrial nations going at it. For Ukraine, it is a sort of existential conflict. There is like the intensity we are seeing that is something like hasn't been really seen in Europe since the Second World War, at least like in terms of people involved, use of weapon
Equipment
systems, and I mean that is definitely a war, even if Russia doesn't call it a war, but it's definitely a war.
Yeah, so it is kind of an unjustified act of military act against another nation. But isn't it that normally it should be declared that like we go to war with you, and that's kind of like the starting. But this time it was.
Yeah, it all started, of course, all the way back to 2014. But there's a huge amount of different wars that have not been declared as such. So just because it's usually if another nation's tanks are rolling in without the consent of the other party, then it's pretty much a war, even though it hasn't been declared or is called a special military operation.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, but I know that some people still try not to acknowledge that it's a war. So you took us back to 2014. Should we start? Of course, we are not going. This is not a history podcast, but can you tell us? So where do you see this coming from, and what were the premises, and how it escalated now to this point?
Yeah, well, you know, there is sort of. If we do really sort of want to look at this from the what are the reasons for this war, we do sort of have to go back like way further than 2014. There is a lot of sort of Russian imperialism in the post-Soviet space going on, but it's really mostly about Russia sort of trying to get a grasp on like countries bordering in on the like former Soviet empire, that it thinks that it has some like sort of a justification for like having this having a say in how these nations are run, how they act. And Russia doesn't really like being this lesser player, which it is.
Big ego.
Yes, lots of national ego there at play. And then we have sort of the Putin's sort of the Russian national spirit idea of this like people being one, which is very problematic from I have a degree from political history. Yeah. So that sort of historical narrative, that's a bit problematic in the sort of historic viewpoint, because these nations have their own long histories. But when you want to make an empire, then you sort of have to build this narrative that somehow justifies it.
Brainwash the people.
Yeah, you could call it that. I would perhaps not use the word brainwash, but it's influencing people at least.
It was too harsh, maybe. Yeah. But actually, I'm sorry. Then I pick on you because this you were saying about that the roots are much further before. So some of the I would not say critics, but some of the different point of view about this whole, that is happening. Some people I heard saying that Ukraine doesn't and never existed, that it was always being part of one or the other empire, and this and that, and under Poland and what so. You will for sure enlighten me more. So does this kind of statement even make sense, that like, okay, that country doesn't even exist, so Russia is kind of like taking back what it belonged to them?
Well, Ukraine's borders have, of course, shifted during the years, but I think that's the same thing for many other European countries also, and one could argue that Finland doesn't exist because Finland got its independence just a little over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's more of a Russian narrative that really plays to their goals.
Yeah. I mean, we have internationally recognized border for a state called Ukraine that has people in it called the
Ukrainians.
yes, back from 1991. Russia has recognized it back then. Everyone has recognized it back then. So going sort of into this primordial thinking of like, well, these nations aren't real. That's sort of, well,
It's an excuse.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's like very sort of problematic, just as Emil said, from this point of view of like history, because all of these pieces of land, all of these so-called people in like history, they've been under someone else sometimes. So like, if we go down that road, really, should we just have a sort of a Frankish empire under like, Charlemagne? Probably doesn't work out like that.
Yeah, you have to draw a line somewhere. And then if it was officially recognized, then should be the statement that it is there.
Yes,
Yeah, exactly.
But is it so, and is it true that the area and the regions on the border to Russia, they think they belong to Russia, and that there is population that is actually feeling more Russian than Ukrainian?
That might have been true at like some point, but this war at least has like sort of shifted the feeling of like Russian speaking population down in Ukraine really towards Ukraine. And then even when Ukraine was like sort of getting its independence from the Soviet Union, when the like Soviet Union broke up, they actually had a referendum where these parts of the country voted for an independent Ukraine rather than being a part of Russia, which again sort of takes away the justification from like Russia of these like people wanting to be a part of Russia. Of course, things change. There is a lot of sort of language politics. There is a lot of history there, but it's sort of, at least during that point in time, these people wanted to be a part of Ukraine. They didn't want to be a part of Russia. Of course, things sort of shifted around, but there's at least no like sort of like this clear sort of view and this like clear sort of feeling of these like areas always wanting to be a part of Russia. That is absolutely not true.
Yeah, that's simply not true, and it's also, of course, there are a lot of Russian speakers in those areas, and that's true. But there's one thing is speaking Russian, and another thing is wanting to actually separate yourself from your home country and joining Russia. So that's also two different things that I think some people might mix up.
Yeah.
Or then maybe it's been used as another way of influencing.
Yes.
So it's a kind of fake news rather than partly influencing.
Yeah, technique. And I mean, there are certainly people who like did want to be Russia there. I mean, as I said, there like was a referendum, and like everyone didn't vote for joining Ukraine. So like there are those sympathies, but most of the people in that region were for the state of Ukraine, and that's just how sort of
and then
politics work. Yeah, sometimes.
Not only there are many people speaking Russian there, but all around Russia and in Ukraine there are many families and people that they come from both roots. They are half Ukrainian and half Russian.
Yeah.
And so that is quite. It's kind of, it has been anyway described as like a family fight, because people are interconnected in a way, in a familiar, in the lineage of the family, and that's kind of also shocking. To me, it has happened that it's kind of like fighting with some of your half brother or half sister. So
Yes, there's definitely these stories too, but then it's really unclear to say that how many of these there actually is, because they are single stories that might come up just because they are so good stories. So it's I don't think that it's that common of a thing at the moment. Of course, I can't talk on behalf of every single Ukrainian city.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sometimes maybe we generalize, but these are themes that came in the news and in social media. So they for sure, if they also stick into me, they stick into other people. So
yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. I mean, Ukraine and like Russia do have a long history. Of course, mostly Russian Empire has been the cause of that history, but the sort of Russian speakers are a very large population. For example, Zelensky is a Russian speaker.
Yeah.
Natively. So it's it is a sort of a very sort of close cultural relationship, perhaps, but then the political shift has been very, very large in the past decade now.
Yeah. So let's draw the line to the Crimea in 2014, and if we make some sort of a rapid history lecture, who wants to start to bring us from that point until where we are?
Yes, so the Ukrainians had a popular uprising. There is many ways to call it. Russians would probably call it a revolution or a coup. Some would maybe call it an uprising during the Maidan, where they kicked out Viktor Yanukovych, who was the president at the time. Very pro-Russian, very corrupt, suspected for many less than stellar things done as a politician. And then Russia did not like that. This was over a, I think, trade deal with the EU, which Yanukovych decided not to go through with, but he rather wanted to make some deals with the Russians, and the Russians didn't like this because the Maidan leaders were very pro-West. There was talk of loaning Crimea to NATO, not in sort of official negotiations kind of way, but there was lots of sort of
political
discourse,
talk.
Yes, about sort of kicking Russia out, and then Russia went nuts.
Yeah, they didn't want they didn't want to lose the influence and the power.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much, they really don't like losing influence or power, so they started orchestrating these military events in eastern Ukraine. First it was Crimea, which first there came these soldiers with no tags. Russia didn't say that, or Russia actually denied that it's not their men who are capturing Crimea, that it would be something that the Crimeans are themselves doing. But then later Russia and Putin have admitted that yes, it was Russian soldiers in Crimea, and also
in the eastern Ukraine.
Yes, and also that's
eastern Ukraine.
And during the time it was obvious for pretty much everyone. And later also Russia has admitted this themselves. So there's no, it's all very clear. And the same thing happened in eastern Ukraine. Russia started mobilizing these so-called revolutions that would not have happened without Russia. And
probably monetary support from Russia also.
Yes,
everything
it's political, monetary,
paid for. So sure they have some.
Paid for it, brought in guns, brought in food and other stuff. Of course, down in Crimea, this is sort of my first memory of this war. Is the sort of like the Russian fleet of helicopters just like flying over from Rostov into like Crimea over the sea. Very very sort of overt land grab way of doing that, but yeah, I think that's my first sort of memory of this, and I mean, because it was so like overt, that was very bold of Russia also, just like sort of going, yeah, I mean, we can do this.
Yeah.
What you gonna do, NATO? That sort of set the sort of stage for this whole thing. That is how they've sort of kept on going in this war, ever until they kind of dropped the ball February last year with their not that competent of a way of going into Ukraine with their armed forces. Let's just call it that.
Yeah, but if you go back to Crimea, so they attack, they fake, they stage that there are other troops, nameless troops, that they are there, and they create other problems in the east of Ukraine for sure to have two fronts for the war, so to split the army. So how did it go then? What the next step until the admission of Crimea?
Well, the next step was of course repeating that in eastern Ukraine, and well, the war in eastern Ukraine, the Donbas war, went on. Russians, when they saw that it was not going well, Russians started sending in more equipment, soldiers, and so
even like actual like Russian military units went in, which then sort of fought in these couple of bigger battles, influencing like the outcomes, basically beating the Ukrainian troops because the Ukrainian army was in shambles.
Yes.
They could fight the sort of Russian revolutionaries, so to say, but the Russian regulars sort of were too big of a match with their armor, with their all of the things that they had. So the Russian regulars go in. There is a sort of 6 months, year of fighting, and then it all sort of dies down onto this thing that we now call the contact line of 2015.
Yeah, and then the conflict froze. Both parties did some smaller missions and shot with their artillery and mortars at each other, but really the stage was that Russian backed troops were on the other side of the contact line, and then Ukrainian soldiers on the other side, and also Russia controlled Crimea.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was the stage which the situation was frozen into for about from 2015 to 22.
Yes, and this also when you were saying, Jon, that like Russia went bold in and said like, hey, Europe or NATO, what can you do to us?
Yeah,
they went boldly. They also did the same in Georgia before.
Yeah.
So and then they did the same now with Ukraine.
Yeah.
So did you see this playing when like 1 year ago? Did you see like some signs that this is going to happen again? Did you follow history and you follow news? And
I think it was around. Well, I was working in the European Parliament at the moment, and we started talking that the war might be actually happening from, I think, November 2021.
Yeah,
and
November,
then,
December, somewhere there.
Yeah, and then me and John also started talking at that point, and I think that me and John...
I think you put some post somewhere where you were showing that you had conversation about the war before it happened. So
yeah. And I think at least in January, me and John met, and we discussed about the situation, and we're pretty well. One could say that we knew that the war is coming.
Yeah. Then we sort of brought in our third guy called Erik, who is one of the three sort of leads in this like team of ours. That is around the time that we brought him in. Also, because I was sort of texting with Emil, I was texting with Eric, and like that was just getting tiring. So I just went, fuck it, let's just have a group chat. And it then sort of grew up from like that. But I think that the biggest sort of red flag, like the moment that we knew that it's going to happen, there is no sort of going back, was when Russia was like bringing up blood packs to the troops, because you have to take those out of the freezer, and then you can't refreeze those blood packs. So
and
you don't bring them.
Stuff.
Definitely.
So you don't sort of bring those for like an exercise.
No, of course.
Because that is a very sort of rare.
Because
resource.
Russia, before attacking, they were mounting troops at the border for some sort of.
Military exercise, but then it
they had sort of done that before, so there was sort of this.
You could believe them still.
Yeah. Is this a war? Is it a sort of a show of force trying to force Ukraine to like some political concessions? But then once, like the troops just like stayed there, then we had the ammunition, I think exports of like nitrate were like banned, and then the blood bags, there was just sort of more and more stuff that was
adding
like
up.
Yes, Russians bought their navy from other parts of the country, and so it was getting extremely expensive if it was just for show.
How many sources do you check to get to know all this? Because it's anyway. This of course I'm not in that kind of line of business as you are, but this was kind of quite detail about the blood bags.
We just read Facebook news. No. God, it has been a long time. Where did we get the information about the blood bags?
I think it was some international medias these medias that were doing some news from the time, and also at the moment we do a lot of different. Well, we use different methods for checking different events. We use, of course, the normal media and social media, local medias in Ukraine and local social media groups, different information provided by both parties. Then we use satellite imagery and SAR, and then we use geolocation, for example, if we get footage or pictures from the battlefields, in order to verify them, then we need to geolocate them, so that we need to know each and every spot, and metadata, different archives, different topographic and geographic information. There's a lot of things that we use.
How much would you say that of your working time, how much it's concentrated in accumulating information? I think it's really time consuming and long.
I mean, that is like sort of most of it. I think just like sort of following sources, getting that information. Of course, by now we have some like good sort of working practices, which is helping a lot. And I mean, we have also sort of started to like be a bit lazy in that we know who are decent sort of aggregators of the like information. So it sort of saves us some time knowing that like if that we don't have to follow absolutely everything. We can follow some of these guys who are all of them sort of
already some stuff and double checking.
Which is like we just don't have the hours in the day anymore to like sort of follow everything, because during I think like the first week we were doing like 19-hour days.
Yeah, we didn't actually sleep.
Basically, it was like more like just like shutting off for like an hour or like two, and just like going back.
And we can. If the Russians and Ukrainians are, for example, talking in their different groups about same event, for example, then we might look into it, see if there's any video evidence, any pictures, if satellite images can
Confirm.
verify something, and so there's a lot of different methods, but at the moment also the conflict is it's not frozen, but things happen really slowly.
Yeah.
So we don't have to observe every single front all the time.
Yeah, everyone is sort of waiting for this big Ukrainian counter-offensive. Everyone is talking about it. Everyone is going mad every time something happens on the front, which then we check this information, and it's basically nothing is happening.
Yeah.
But it's this sort of very tense situation.
Yeah.
Where everyone's waiting for something to happen, but it's mostly just people fighting for Bakhmut for the 4th month or actually 10th month. I think.
Yeah. It depends how you how you count it. Yeah.
But let's go back. So then Russia starts to accumulate troops and equipment, valuable equipment. What's the next stage, or what's the next step? What is the reason for attacking? Of course, they are saying that they are saving people, but has there happened something, or?
Yeah, I mean, Russia had obviously made the decision to go in well before the war actually starts. That is why there is the build-up. That is why we are going past the point of no return with sort of bringing these boats up into the Black Sea by rail, which is amazing.
Crazy.
And there's blood packs, all of this. But I do think that it is this slow sort of how to put it, sort of this slow slope from 2015, 2014 towards Russia sort of wanting to have the influence over its over the countries near it, and it's just sort of it's sort of now or never maybe for Russia.
Yeah, and Russians didn't really. I think that they did not actually see a proper political ending to this, because I don't know. Of course, for example, Western nations and Ukrainians tried to negotiate still at the start of 2022, but it's rather clear that the Russians have had decided already at that point that there will be a war.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that the sort of the catalyst for the war, sort of the reason for the war, has been brewing in Putin's mind for I mean, maybe ever since 1991, when he sees Eastern Germany basically collapse all around him. So it's sort of saying why now is if they wait longer, then it's sort of
Ukraine
is going to be more and more ready, but then
more difficult.
But then why at all? It's just because empire, I think.
And if they waited more, Ukraine would integrate faster to the West. The integration process was clear, and there was no turning back. There were Russians didn't really have that many means to turn the democratization process and turning to the West. So when you don't have the political options, then what do you have?
I just wonder why would they want to stop the democratization of Ukraine. But do you think
it's sort of a problem for Russia, because Russia doesn't like having these revolutions near it, because that is a threat to the sort of Russian regime. If the Russian people see that these other countries that
are doing better.
Yes. That Russia has sort of built up as it's these are like us. These are basically Russians. They and Russia needs this sort of a dictatorship to run it. But if these countries, they have successful revolutions, they kick out these strong leaders, and they get on the way of actually becoming democratic sort of Western
the lifestyle
nations.
grows and they are healthier and
over the border. this is happening, and like Russian people might just sort of start looking at it and just going, "Hey, wait, what?
So,
Why don't we have this?"
So
And
that would be kind of like the fear of an internal revolution.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Putin sees West as a threat, but it's not necessarily a military threat, but it's a sort of an ideological threat.
The status
I think.
quo would change.
Yeah.
So it's not to bring back the old empire. It's not this kind of like
Well, it's that too, because that's like sort of
glory.
Yeah. I mean, glory, power. It's this like strong Russia, but it's also sort of Putin going, we can have this sort of Western way of life spreading also into Russia, because that's also a sort of a threat for him.
Yeah.
And also, if there are these different paths that countries take that do not actually benefit Russia, then Russia also gets angry. So they are looking things from their perspective. Things need to be beneficial to them, and joining West democratization processes, they don't benefit Russia. That's if countries bordering Russia are anti-democratic and weak by corruption and internal fights, then that's something that actually helps Russia. For example, Belarus, that's a dictatorship, and that's an asset to Russia.
And it's controlled, definitely.
Yeah, it's controlled. They can control it, and they also control the leader, and the leader can't really do anything against Russia, because if it wouldn't be Russia backed, then it would be a shaky dictatorship, so to say. So
also there has been mentioned that the fear, Putin's fear was that NATO would come too close to the border. And that
I mean, once you have NATO on the border, then you can't really influence those countries anymore, can you? Then you then those processes that are going on, that have gone on down in Poland, of course, how well sort of the westernizing process has gone, that's a whole other sort of conversation. But these countries like the Baltics, like Poland, Czechia, they have joined these Western institutions. They have become democratic more or less, more than Russia at least. And once you have NATO on that border, there is no way for Russia to...
The door is closed.
Yes.
Yeah, so when Russia says that NATO is threatening Russia, even they themselves know that they aren't talking about a military threat. Every single sensible person understands that NATO cannot and has no intention to make a military operation, an attack against Russia. Actively. And of course, both parties can have, for example, information operations and so on. But that's not the point here. The thing is that when a country joins NATO, Russia can't. Or Russia loses its so-called right to oppress and attack it.
And influence them.
Influence in many ways. And well, in Ukraine, that's a prime example that if it would have joined NATO, then Russia could not have attacked it.
It would have been a kind of a different scale of event and war.
And
definitely.
Why was Russia angry of Finland joining NATO? It's not like the Russians really wanted to have peace. If Finland would have been outside of NATO, then Russians would have had less. Finland's defense would have been weaker, and
for sure, because there is less support from behind. But do you think Finland would have been in danger if Finland would have not applied for NATO?
I mean,
of course, this is so speculative.
But
militarily, militarily, could there have been a war? I mean, maybe, but it's like militarily we have been doing pretty well for the past, let's say, 20 years at least. Ever since the 90s, like the FDF has been sort of doing really well. Cold War, we had some problems. Let's not go into that too much. But the bigger problem, I think, is the like sort of vestiges of the like Cold War, because we did in the like political sense, because we did have the Finlandization. Isn't it great that we have this whole like term named after us?
Yeah.
Means that it is a great term. We are great because we have a term that is basically means that we are in the Russian sphere of influence without being sort of under the Russian boot quite as much as the like other like sort of socialist nations were.
Yeah.
So we had Russia influence our like foreign policy, our domestic policy, and we never sort of had the conversations about it in like post Cold War space. So these sort of traditions and there's like institutions of that are still kind of around, or rather where kind of around could be used by Russia to like sort of influence Finnish politics. All of this talk about like this special relationship between Russia and Finland, and this sort of people not sort of wanting to rock the boat, not like really wanting to piss off Russia. All of this has been...
Yes, because the relationship anyway between Finland and Russia has been a good one.
Yes, mainly, but it has been good because Finland has agreed to some terms. For example, when Finland then wanted to do actually some bigger changes to its security policy by joining NATO, then Russia stopped being friendly. So it's not like the friendship could last if Finland did something that Russia would not like. Yeah. However, Russia can do anything that Finland doesn't like, and it really doesn't care, and it didn't affect the relationship. So it was like there
was this power balance. So
it's like the violent guy at school. If you are nice to him, he doesn't beat you up. So
it's not a healthy relationship.
It's not.
No, certainly not. Yeah. I mean, there is this term for it. I'm not sure what it is in English. Maybe like border nation policy, reunavaltiopolitiikka. Shout out to Johanna Raino-Niemi back in University of Helsinki. Thank you for this. But this sort of policy enacted by these nations on like border of these like bigger nations that are sort of neutral smaller nations having to sort of walk this political tightrope, especially during the Cold War, but then sort of afterwards, where they have these bigger angry neighbors that they have to pacify, even though they try to do their own like policy. And like Finland has been doing that for a long time, and it has sort of become this big part of Finnish political institutions to like sort of keep up that policy, that we can't really get away from it because that's just how things have been done. Let's not piss off Russia by like not being a border nation, but like joining NATO. And now that we are in NATO, we can maybe get away from like those like vestiges of the Cold War.
Yeah, I'm not, well, I am officially Finnish also, but I'm not Finnish, so my history probably was studied in a different way, not so deeply about Finnish and Finnish history. And the future will tell only. I'm not a future teller, but I always thought like, why Finland is not part of the NATO, and why did Finland need a wake-up call like this?
Yeah.
And of course, maybe this will turn around badly. We don't know, but it was for me kind of like obvious that like that neighbor has shown already before some instability.
Yes.
And so but before this happening in Ukraine, or the latest happening in Ukraine, it was a wake-up call. Why before everyone was convinced that, okay, we can mediate and these are our friends, even if they have a knife in the hand?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, because that's also something that I've tried to... I've been pro-NATO since, I don't know, I've been pro-NATO for years
since
and years.
You can remember.
Yeah. So that has never been an issue for me, and at least for me, the basis of this thinking has not changed really. The Russian attack in February, it was just a continuum of the same things that I've seen over and over again. But for some people, even our politicians, our leaders, it's really interesting that they have not seen the most basic things, and it's also frightening that if the NATO thing, that their people had to be actually killed before they could understand how wrong they were. They can be wrong about other things too in that case.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, that like you are a knowledgeable person, you both, and you study history, so of course you have a clear opinion. I am not, but still I was kind of like thinking like
NATO is a European thing actually, and NATO is the basis of the defense of European Union. Finland had these thoughts about this separate
European defense.
And Finland tried to process it and go through with it, but the United EU Defence Forces, that was never a thing actually. It was only a thing in Finland because everybody else had NATO.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of a clear given.
I mean, from like Finnish point of view, I think there is just like, as I said, like the institutions, like these political institutions of this, like, you know, border state policy, they were there. Old guard that was sort of still in power since the Cold War, that was sort of still there, and there was this sort of no one just, I guess, wanting to rock the boat.
We go with the normal activities.
But it's just easier to like sort of go with the flow and just keep on doing what you've always been.
And many people don't actually know about security policy. They don't understand foreign policy, and that also applies to leaders. People who know nothing about defense might have an like extremely saturated opinion on NATO, even though they don't actually know.
And then they have political influence. That become negative.
And I personally know these people. So
I can see that it's becoming personal.
I mean, like, defense policy is like sort of the red-headed stepchild of this, like, you know, all this like politics, because no one cares about it until it shits the bed.
And then it's turning. And
then it's too late.
What was the saying, by the way? But Jon, especially you say that you like maps and that kind of thing. I just, what do you think? Because anyway, Finland, everyone praises Finnish army, how it is well prepared, the system. Also, NATO has been making training with Finnish forces, and they praise Finland, the techniques, the way and the level of the training. But could Finland defend such a huge borderline against Russia?
Well, it's less about the length of the border. I mean, much of that border, that is forest, that is swamps. There is like 10 to 15, I think, crossings over the border into the east. Many of those small. Russian armed forces, they need roads, they need rail. So it sort of limits the areas where like Russia can come over, because if they walk over the border into the sort of forest of Kainuu, I mean, who cares?
Because just a limited number of them can come through. And not tanks and no big artillery.
And they like have to like move on these roads. So the sort of the Finnish doctrine that is built upon the Russians having to use those roads and then using the terrain to their advantage. Yes. So the like big question, of course, is how long could we defend without NATO? That has always been the like question. But I think that it's more about, has been for a long time, more about giving the Russians, I mean, if they would have taken everything, then they maybe could have done it if they had done it smartly, which they didn't down in Ukraine. But it's more about giving them like the bloodiest nose that
it would be too costly. And if Russia would have attacked Finland the way it attacked Ukraine, it
would have been even worse for them.
It would have been like such a bloodbath that I don't. It would be hard to imagine because Finland was or is more well prepared and especially has trained against pretty much what we saw in Ukraine. And if for example many Finns think that Russians failed at during 1939 at Rata Road, where they got themselves encircled and lost huge amounts of equipment. That would have been nothing compared to the amount Russians would have lost if they tried to attack Finland the way they attacked Ukraine.
Yeah, it was just like a couple of years ago. It was actually a year ago. So exactly at the beginning. I was traveling from Lapland down to Helsinki, and going down, I went to the East Road.
Yeah.
And again, coming from another country where the military service has been dismissed as mandatory long ago, Italy. So I was anyway shocked also to see that like roads are prepared so that airplane can land. And there is like all the infrastructure also, it's created in case something. So I kind of felt like, okay, someone actually thinking this. Maybe we don't belong to NATO, but still like the stage of readiness, it's quite high.
Yeah. I mean, like going back to the Cold War once again, this is, I think, going to be a theme here. But even though sort of the political leadership that was very much influenced by like Soviet Union, like the military leadership, I think has like always been very clear about who is the real sort of
the threat.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. And I mean, we have had good sort of institutions here that we did sort of get from the Germans back in the First World War. We've had good NCO Corps. We've had sort of this military planning, military sort of doctrine has been very sort of clear in like minds of this like, you know, military leadership. It's been very functional, and they have sort of got these laws through where all the bridges need to have spots for like explosives if they sort of need to be
blown up.
Yeah. Just like the Swiss did, they do. So it's been sort of very clear that we need to prepare, even if the like politicians might be sometimes like a bit aloof.
Yeah.
Finland is in very many ways prepared in ways that it's more prepared than one could even think about, even especially if you're not interested mainly in military side of things. So of course these airstrips on the roads, they are maybe the most visual thing.
But does Finland have, like, you know, if you consider like America, that of course they have a lot of equipment and they show off, but then they have also this kind of secret projects and secrecy behind like bases and equipment. Does Finland have the same kind of secrecy and more weapons and more things than but then I have to kill you.
No.
Finland doesn't really, you know, Finland doesn't have a stash of secret leopards, for example. That's not something that Finland has, but you know, a part of the comprehensive defense Finland has of course is ready on multiple levels, you could say. So
and of course secrets are a tactical advantage, so for sure there are secrets.
Yeah, and we don't, of course, know everything. And
and it's like FDF doesn't really like to talk about stuff. FDF has been very tight-lipped about like a lot of things politically for the past forever. So there is a lot of sort of things that are not talked about publicly, but that might be sort of in the know or then like not in the know. There is no sort of, just as Emil said, there is no like sort of secret stashes of this like stuff. We just don't have the money. But there is a lot of things that is sort of not out in the open.
Yeah, I think there was actually one case that there was this secret stash of artillery. Finland, of course, has the most one of the biggest artilleries in Europe, and a small medium stash of secret artillery that has actually been there.
It has been found?
Yeah.
It's like because Finland had to, there are these sort of international treaties that we have to go by, which like forces to sort of put out this list of the equipment of like land forces and like air force every year.
Yeah.
So how the like story goes is that a bunch of this already was like sort of moved into the navy for the sort of purposes of this listing, so that they are not
found
on the list. Sort of they're there. They are not an actual sort of secret, as in like, you know, we have artillery, but it's like sort of.
It's just we just don't happen to have to list them.
Yeah.
Let's close one eye.
Yeah.
But this is a theme that Jon, at least you've also taken a couple of times. The fact that the way Russia, they stacked their army, they prepared everything, equipment, but then when the play started, it was
a disaster,
a shit show. So
shit show is a good word.
Why? What has happened? Like
Russia didn't go in for a war. I think Russia went in for a
special military operation.
Yeah, exactly. Russia went in for a sort of a regime change operation, like in Hungary in like, was it 56, 58, or in like Prague back in 68, something where they just roll in the tanks and they have token resistance from the Ukrainian army, but it just collapses. But that doesn't happen. Russia faces determined resistance from the Ukrainians, and the like people don't come out into the streets with like flowers.
Yeah, welcoming.
So they didn't really have these plans about actually fighting. Like the orders, they were sending like a day or two before they actually went into the country. So the officers like in charge couldn't like properly plan stuff, and it was a shit show.
So they underestimated Ukraine. Defensive and like their
hubris,
yes, and then they overestimated themselves.
Absolute hubris.
Yeah, they lacked proper intelligence and they also lacked proper training.
Yeah,
there were a lot of things.
Yeah,
I'm puzzled because if you are Putin and you're going to prepare, most likely after Crimea, they started to plan it already. So accumulate. All the artillery and prepare for it. I would think, if someone think rationally, maybe Putin did not, but how it happened that like they had like old equipment, breaking down equipment, they didn't have organized attacks, they had like wrong information, intelligence.
Yeah, well, I mean like that's like mostly bad planning. Hubris that the enemy is just going to collapse. Back in 2014, 2015, like the Ukrainian army was a shit show. Let's be honest here, and I think that also sort of gave Russia this wrong idea about what it's going to be like. They were probably expecting something like 2014, 2015, where the Ukrainians have a very, very hard time mounting up resistance, even like getting these units to like fight. That is what they learned back in 2014. Well, it's been 7 years, things have changed, but the Russian thinking about how the Ukrainians will fight hasn't changed. So they sort of have the old expectations for like newer army, and then even then Russia actually sort of the popular narratives might be a bit wrong in that like Russia actually at times they were just really unlucky also. There are situations where the Ukrainians have like basically civilians who were like given guns, stopping the Russians, and they just sort of get like someone panics and the like Russian formation.
Spread, yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
And it's like
But that's a lack of training, and so
lack of training, lack of being prepared for an actual war, because the soldiers weren't really told that they're going in.
Yes.
Basically, they were told like hours
yeah.
before they went in. So,
Yeah.
so
So how
then
much do you
someone's
think-
shooting at you and it just falls apart.
How much do you think this exactly the motivation? Because you are sent there, most likely no one is telling you what happens. You are a soldier. You fear, and then the Ukrainian, they have Zelensky, and he's a showman.
Oh, yeah,
Really,
absolutely.
we've seen kind of a showman,
Yeah.
war showman. So for sure, the Ukrainian, they had like suddenly morale and boost from like
Zelensky staying in Kyiv was like one of the best things to happen to like Ukrainian fighting spirit, I think. If the government had actually fled, I think that would have been really bad, because like that's, we have the corrupt government fleeing and just leaving us to
just
fend
say
for
no one
ourselves.
cares.
Yeah.
Isn't it that he said something when Americans called him and said like we can send an airplane, and he said I don't need airplane, I need ammunition.
Yeah, I think
became
actually
like-
that I'm not sure if that quote actually happened.
That is a very good story,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's real.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah.
So
because he
it's-
has been a social media
Yeah.
like star.
Yeah.
With the video he made and the way he talked, it's kind of like he would have been prepared for this before.
Yeah. And and Russians lacking morale, that is also seems to be rather true, and I'm surprised that it doesn't actually show more, because it's clear that the Russian society doesn't care about its soldiers.
And it doesn't care about the war, really.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, and well, the Russian society doesn't care about its citizens even. So, so really, I can't. It's more that the culture that you have to be patriotic and you cannot betray the country, the state. That's it's seen as a shame. So that's maybe more what's keeping it on. It's Russians are fighting. In the attacking Russian forces because Russia is such a good country and they want to spread the goodness around.
It's the glory that they get, but can it also be that the misinformation that Russia has been spreading to the people also?
Yeah, I mean, like certainly, and I mean, parts of the propaganda, and I mean, as the war is now going on. If you're a Russian man and there's propaganda has been telling you about basically Ukrainians eating babies.
Exactly. Yeah. So
But then
they're
also
preparing some chemical weapon, showing.
But then
someone with
also,
a white
because the
clothes.
war has been going on for a year, now it's sort of also getting personal, because it is going to get crueler and crueler and crueler.
Yeah.
And it's sort of. You've had friends die there. You at least may know people who have died there, and it's just going to sort of ramp up into this. We are fighting just to fight because these other guys are killing us because we are fighting, and it's a sort of a circle of just going in for the violence.
But of some parts, the Russian propaganda is also kind of weird. So it doesn't. For example, some of these Russian commercials, for example, this one commercial, an old man doesn't have money to buy sausages from the store, and he is about to sell his car because things are so bad for him. And then his nephew enlists to the army, and then he gets paid because he's a soldier and everything is good again. So they aren't even at most points trying to appeal that it's the Russian society is actually worthy to give your life for. It's more about the money. It's more telling lies about the West. So it's really interesting. It's
Yeah.
I wouldn't be motivated. Well, I would ask at least some questions if I was in a situation that my grandparents would not get enough food, or they
Yes.
couldn't, or they would have to sell their means of transportation, and the only way to fix that isn't to actually make our society better. The only way to get away from that situation would be to go and kill people in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, like this one like recent thing that we actually showed on Ukraina Studio on like Helsingin Sanomat this week was this propaganda ad that was like basically telling the Russian men like, haven't you always, dream of being a soldier? Why are you doing your, shitty job when you could fulfill your childhood dreams, which is sort of, I mean, maybe they dreamed of that when they were a kid, but like most of these guys either have gone through the Russian conscription system and like probably lost all of the glamour of that of the like soldier life, or then found a way to like skip the service because they really didn't want to be a soldier.
Yeah.
So it's very sort of, I do think that the Russian state is like trying to desperately find an angle that would actually work for their sort of propaganda to like get people to like come in, but they haven't really found a good angle except for the come and get some money.
Yeah, that's also something that strikes me because the country is huge, so for sure there are differences between the population and their education and their background. If we go up to Siberia or closest to the west, but anyway, Russia was exposed to Western country from news before, right? From social media. So many people, and surely like youngster, teenagers, and people in their 30s, like, well, I'm 40, but still, I am exposed, so I can see that life can be something, and maybe the values can also be changed. But has it been the propaganda so well planned that it has always been going on forever and forever?
Well, it's not necessarily that well planned, but there's been like a lot of propaganda. When you get, like the language that we use, things that we see sort of influences like the way we think, even though we don't want it to.
Sure.
But then there is just the fact that the Russians I have talked to, and I think this is like a common theme that like comes up, is like that the Russians tend to think that the Western media is like just this sort of corrupt and like sort of controlled as like Russian media.
Yeah, okay.
So they're like sort of the
They never believed that what comes from there.
Yeah. So it's like sort of this like, sure, yes, things might be fine, but this like Western media is like sort of creating like this image that is maybe not true, just as the Russian media is like
Has
lying
been
about
doing
everything.
forever,
Then they're
yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah. But it's also now that you tell this couple of stories, I was thinking that like it's funny because also they try to leverage something old or some old people or something like, okay, you can be like an hero of your life if you do like this, and it's kind of like, it seems to me like old propaganda, not updated. And I don't know if you maybe don't follow that, but did you know that Berlusconi also ran again for the government?
I did see that, but I've not.
And he
really
was
followed
using
that.
TikTok. So you see, at least he tried to update his way of like influencing and getting into people. But like this propaganda seems kind of like really old-fashioned.
Yeah, I don't actually know what's going on in Russian TikTok. Does Kreml
Putting in
have
TikTok?
I don't know what kind of information operations they have there, or do they have any? So it's hard to actually. Yeah, I should look into that.
Oh yeah. But I mean, Russia isn't like maybe the most technologically literate system.
Yes, oriented.
Yeah. I mean, it's like they have only now sort of, they are trying to shift into this like online digital mobilization system. So it's sort of, it is dragging in like terms of adopting new tech.
This couple of propaganda you mentioned, they are quite recent, I guess, because this seems to me that it's because the regime, they don't have, I mean, they need new recruitment, they need new people to keep on going. But what was like the propaganda at the beginning of the war, and how to justify what was Russia doing and the Zed?
I mean, it was actually there was very little of that because Russia sort of, I think that like Russia wanted to make it a sort of a done deal. It's like, this has happened.
Fast and clean.
Yeah. I mean, like, bring it to the, like, populace once it's done. There, like, was this talk of, Ukraine attacking these Russian forces, and there's, like, separatists, and there's, like, story of liberating these Donbass, and there's, like, going and purging the Nazis, all of that stuff.
Yeah, that was part of the propaganda.
Yeah.
But is it propaganda?
I mean, oh God, are we now talking about the Nazis? Oh shit,
well, because the Ukraine has used some extremism, like army belonging to the far right.
Yeah, of course. I don't think that any country is fully free of the far right, but well, if you compare Ukraine and Russia, for example, it's clear that there is also a far right problem in Russia too. So, of course, there are always these nutcases. There, if Finland had go to war, there would be someone who would LARP an SS soldier. I'm pretty sure of that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Finland probably wouldn't just let the Nazis form their own sort of regiment. So like there is that, but there's, I mean, Ukraine has some problems. Let's be like honest here. There is like sort of these far right sympathies. There is like the whole sort of national story.
Yeah, this Azov battalion.
Yeah, and the like national story is sort of partially built on the like Bandera and like those guys from the Second World War. But just because you have far right elements, just like because you have organized far right, doesn't mean that like any country first of all has an actual good reason to like go in and just like go
sure
we just
because
let us work this out for you. And then even though Ukraine has those militias and a history, is the like government far right? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Zelensky, I think, has like been partially not that loved by the far right elements, and it's, I mean, they have a Jewish president, for like God's sake.
And Ukraine, especially before the war, the path was towards more democracy, towards more individual freedom, towards more maybe also LGBTQ rights, and so on and so on.
Progressive.
So the big picture has been towards a better society. So and it's clear that, for example, the far right parties in Ukraine, they don't have a they aren't
supporters.
They don't really have supporters. They aren't.
No one votes for them in the like elections. Really, there is sort of we will see later after this war is over how that goes with these sort of far right parties, because wars have a tendency of moving people to the right. I mean, look at us after the Winter War and and like right-wing elements gaining like a bit more traction, and the
nationalism comes
Greater Finland thing. But it's really, I mean, that's a problem caused by Russia now.
It goes against the plan.
And it's also weird that Russia is at the same moment they are saying that Ukraine is full of Nazis, and then on the other moment they are saying that Ukraine is so Western that it's doing gay president and LGBTQ rights, and so at the same time Ukraine is gay and Nazi. So it's not like the Russia is trying to form a coherent picture of Ukraine, but that's also a part of Russian propaganda. They aren't going for one single truth. They are trying to go for multiple truths at the same moment, or then that the truth is something that it's not clear and someone is always trying to. The Russian propaganda works in different ways. You also have to understand it in order to but for our Westerners it's also easy to ridicule the propaganda, because for us most of us at least, we can see it through it.
I mean, in like terms of the far right, what I do want to say is that we can sort of see that there are these elements, that they have these sort of sympathies at times, at least part of the population, and then we can still sort of say, yes, that is true, but that's a problem for after the war, once we get this nation
rebuild the but we are also exposed to fake news. So it's kind of like some people might think that this propaganda or it's like it's fake news and things, and so once you say we can see through this propaganda, everyone can think that this is fake news, but also maybe our news are fake.
Yeah, well, for example, for the war in Ukraine, Finnish media has produced also news that may not be actually true, but that's also where me and John come in. John works at Helsingin Sanomat as a fact checker. I work as a specialist in Iltalehti, and our job is mainly to cut out the fake stuff from there. Fact checking really much.
I mean, during the early days of the war, there was a lot of weird stuff going around. Nowadays, there is a bit less of the weird stuff going around, but it's also, we do have to understand that this is a war that has two sides that both want to spread propaganda, that they both have an angle that they want to be seen in the Western media. Ukraine has its angle. Saying that doesn't mean that we, of course they do have an angle, that they want to keep up the Western support to the sort of through their own sort of messaging, and they also, especially during the early days, wanted to show that they can win, that they can beat back the Russians, that they're not going to collapse. And sometimes that takes a bit of creativity, let's just call it that.
Some colors in your pen.
Yes. But it's natural. But that does mean that we have had some fake news stories, such as during the second day of the war, this story about Ukraine shooting down Russian transport planes full of airborne troops. Never happened. There are no wrecks. There is nothing about that.
Yes.
But these narratives tend to stay, and they sort of
build up.
Build up, and they live on, even though they don't have factual stuff behind them, which is really annoying for me.
but and from a historical perspective also, nowadays the word propaganda has some very negative connotations, but propaganda should be viewed as something that it's just usually part of conflicts. For example, Finland did extreme amounts of propaganda during the Winter Wars, for example, and it's not a hard thing to admit. That's just something that when a country is fighting an existential fight, it just happens. And in Ukraine nowadays, I think that of course Ukraine as a state is producing also propaganda and information narratives, but also some false information is coming from these Western actors that are also following the war. For example, maybe a week ago or something, there was this thing that Ukraine has crossed the Dnipro River and has established a bridgehead on the other bank of the river, and and that went into all major news medias. It was started
it's
by
like overdrive, and everyone's talking about it. These sort of things happen, and then turns out, oh yeah, they have like 45 guys over the river in this place no one really wants to be in.
It's a patrol in this place. But then
meaningful.
For example, in this situation, Ukraine did not say that it had crossed the Dnipro. So it was not from the Ukrainians. It was the Institute for the Study of War that saw a geolocated piece of video where Russians had shot with artillery a place that was close to their lines. And well, the Institute for the Study of War, for some bizarre reason said that okay, Ukrainians are forming a bridgehead, even though it was normal patrolling actions that have been happening for months. And then when the Institute for the Study of War said it, then many Western media outlets decided that it has to be true, and then we were informed about crossing over Dnipro that never actually happened, and which Ukraine didn't even say that happened.
I think this was like the third time this has happened in that area now.
But maybe this also speaks of what you were saying before, that there is pressure building up, so everyone is waiting for something. So they are ready to say, okay, this now happens, so now this is a start.
I mean, I was like sort of like tweeting about this like a week or like 2 ago, where it's sort of we will be seeing probing by the Ukrainian armed forces. We will see recon actions. We will see information operations. And every time this is like going to happen for the next couple of months, everyone's going to lose their minds. Everyone's going to think this is the big one. But actually, we might not know which one is the big one. I mean, might actually be weeks. Probably will be like, at least a couple of days. But it might be weeks. If it actually fails completely, then we might not know from the Ukrainian side basically ever. Because they don't want to say that. But it's this, people are sort of on the edge. People want something to happen.
For sure.
Every time that is very sort of slow, all of these rumors just sort of start like floating around, which is annoying, but it's also sort of fun. I think like my favorite piece of media for the like recent Dnipro thing was, I think, Wall Street Journal basically saying, so we sent a message to this local guy asking him, is this true? Which is like, no, don't do that.
The local guy must, the area is rather big. One single guy might not know what the grand operational situation is. So also, even if someone is part of the military, he might not know what is actually happening in a big picture.
But then someone, maybe his daughter, is texting. Sending emojis like.
And I mean, loads of these people, loads of soldiers on the front, loads of civvies around the area get their news from these sort of social media sources, which means that they are influenced by these same sort of rumors, which means that once you ask the local drunk about the situation, he just might go like, oh yes, I have like seen
know everything,
news about that, and like that's a feedback loop. There is very easily like these feedback loops where you're sort of reporting something, and I mean this is not just in this like rumors, but the like war at large, is that you say something, and then when you start looking for like more information about that, it gets really hard to like know, is this actual new information or are these people just basically saying this stuff because I said it first?
Repeating. People are repeating, and then the story might take some different turns. So it's
But
it's
the telephone game also.
But that's part of our work. We have to find the truth beyond these rumors.
I always trusted Finnish information and tabloids, so keep on doing that. But let's try to do like a fast telling of the happening of the story of the war. For me, maybe I read it wrong, but you were saying that like John, that maybe Russia thought to have a fast war and get things done, and they overestimated Ukrainian resistance, and they overestimated themselves. But is it the attack that they made? They kind of run through the capital, like really fast, trying to. Does that tell us in a strategic way that like they are just going for the big jackpot because they think they can, and they are not thinking about a long term?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's pretty much.
Yeah.
They tried to encircle multiple towns. Actually, it was just not Kyiv. It was also
Kharkiv.
Yeah, Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv, and multiple other towns too. And
Yeah.
Kyiv was one of them.
Yeah.
And that's not kind of like a smart strategy also, because when they had to retreat, they also started to lose.
Yeah. I mean, like long term, probably Russia didn't have a concentration of force, which is very, very important. Is to like have this concentration of force where you want to push through. Russia went in everywhere, and they didn't have this big sort of concentration of force because they thought that if they just do this sort of a thunder run, just like grab land, then it's this has happened. West can't do shit about it, and it's
all
great.
ours.
Yeah. And it's like in terms of Kyiv, it's like get in there, get the like president, get like government, capture them, and then what are they gonna do? Because if they had gotten the president and like government gotten Kyiv, like the Western political leadership would have had a much harder time, sort of going for we will be giving you tons and tons and tons of weapons, because there is no one that they could sort of, first of all, talk with, and like government
is not organized. Would not be organized.
Yeah. And I mean, we had actors like Viktor Orban basically waiting to like see what happens in the war before they take a sort of a stance on it. So had the Russians actually managed to take Kiev, for example, I do think that the sort of political situation around the war would look very different, because a lot of people would have been sort of fine with just going, well, that happened.
Yeah.
Because that's easier. Once again, that is politically easier is to not to rock the boat too much.
Yeah. But okay, then the forces were dispersed around, so they couldn't get so the tactic was also wrong.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
and then at the same time, Europe reacted quite unitedly with boycotts and trying to cut. How big the influence of the boycott and the strategy of the European Union and the Europe? How big of an impact it has had on the events of the war?
Well, first of all, I was pretty surprised that Europe was so united and the Western world. Yeah, it's even though I worked there with one of the politicians at the time, I thought that it would be more difficult, but it has had an impact, and especially the material help has kept Ukraine in the game longer and longer, and also now they are aiding through the military or training. That's also a big part that should not be overlooked. But of course, the sanctions have hit the Russian economy, but they have managed to at least replace some of the lost funds from Europe, so that they have started doing more and more business to the east.
Yeah.
So it's not like everything has stopped. It has had an effect anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, then we have this problem of these like European businesses trying to go around these sanctions, selling into China, into Kazakhstan, like this stuff that like then gets sent to Russia. There is that problem. But I mean, without the sort of united Western Front, sending in arms, sending in ammunition, sending in help, I do think that like Ukraine probably would have collapsed during last summer.
Yes, it's
At
really
least
hard
like
to
the army like may
Yeah.
have collapsed round
or
Pasna and like that fighting.
it might have been that the army would have at least done worse. It's
Yeah.
hard to say without Western help what the situation would actually be.
But it would be a lot worse.
Yeah,
Way
that's for
worse.
sure. Yes.
And at least also, as you were saying, Emil, the fact that the troops are now trained by other countries, this also helps building up the pressure, because these people will go back to the front with new skills, with new equipment. So everyone is waiting for like, okay, now the upgraded version of the army is going down there. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, Ukraine is building units that all the time. So with Western equipment that we know that is in Ukraine, but we just haven't seen on the front lines yet. And at the same time, Western countries are also training a lot of Ukrainian soldiers. So there is a lot of unit building happening that just we haven't yet seen what they are capable of.
Yeah, but it's also that is not a magic bullet. Like the training isn't that long for a lot of the Western trained Ukrainian troops, and there's only like so much you can cram into like 6, 8, 10 weeks. So it's sort of not like they are going to have a NATO army there.
Yeah.
That's not happening. There is a lot of problems with the institutions in the country. Like the army has its own like sort of long-term problems that like sort of need to be fixed, that are not easy to fix because those are cultural problems. And it's like it is good that the like training is being given, but it's also, let's not sort of get our hopes
expect too much
too up. Because we've seen also like Western trained troops also have a horrible time down in Ukraine when they have their first sort of contact with the Russians, and it's a sort of a roll of the die every time. When you bring in green troops who have not seen fighting into this.
Sure. How big of a deal are tanks? Because there is with the Leopard, right? So how tactical big advantage gives?
Tactically, very useful, but there is not enough of them, I think.
Yeah, tank is a weapon system after all. So even if you have the best tank in the world, but you do not have trained crewmen, you do not have the logistical supply. If your fellow soldiers do not know how to do upkeep on the tank, then the tank is pretty much useless.
It's just expensive.
Yeah, it's an expensive iron coffin. So it's just the tanks are still very useful in the modern battlefield, and there has not been anything that has actually replaced a tank in a tactical point of view. But it's still if the different parts of the weapon system are not in good order, then the tank loses its effect eventually. So if it's used in a wrong way, if
it's the whole battalion and how they move and cover each other.
So for example, that battalion actually knows how to use combined arms warfare with the tanks and
how to talk with like units next to them.
So if one tank platoon, for example, has success, or a tank company and infantry, if they have or armored company have success, if they can't
bring up fresh troops and
bring
like
up reserves,
help from the other units,
the second, if they can't use a second echelon, for example, if they can't communicate in a battalion-sized manner, then it's less
great
effective.
that you have some like success, but it's not enough to like just like
so
get
bigger
these
caliber
wins.
doesn't give you that much of a advantage.
Not always.
I mean,
not
it's
always.
like it is like going to be useful in those like one-on-one fights, in those like company and company fights, but like in the like large scale on the like of like whole like let's say Southern Front, they are still just tanks. They are modern tanks. That's good. They are not some old tanks from like storage like the Russians have.
Yes.
That is even better. But in the end, they are still just tanks.
Yeah, of course there are for example, does it have good night vision, for example? Can it operate at nights? That's a big thing.
Pure advantage,
yeah. And does it, which, is it reliable? Is it reliable in its technique?
Yeah.
And so on. Does it have good protection systems, or does it have some flaws that might send the turret up 100 meters in the air, and so on? So there's a lot of these factions that so some tanks are better than others, but
they're still tanks. And,
there's a lot of things to be considered.
And it's like if you have a modern Russian tank with its thermals and its night vision, that is going to be worse than Leopard 2A6, but it's not going to be that much worse. So it's sort of down to the training and combined arms,
and then you have to have a general that knows how to prepare the tactic and according to what they have at use.
And thing with those Western tanks is they are going to lose those. We will be seeing very soon, which is in a month or 2 at the longest, we will be seeing burning Leopards on the fields. And that's normal. That is sort of supposed to happen. When you,
it's not like a dramatic event. I mean, you have to count that will happen.
Leopard is not a Wunderwaffe. It's not a miracle weapon that's supposed to be invincible. That's But that
tanks
also
will be lost. Men will die.
But that can also be a talking point in Russian narrative, because if they paint of these super paint of an image of these super Western tanks, and then when the tanks start
deployed,
so then it's a propaganda win also for the Russians. But no sensible person thinks that a Western tank is unbeatable.
How many other dirty weapons have been used? There was talk about hypersonic bullets. Is it going to get worse than worse for sure, but will be more and more dirty?
I mean, well, as I sort of talked earlier, I do think that it's going to get crueler, and it's going to get crueler and crueler and crueler as war goes on. It is the whole circle of violence. Neither side has used chemical weapons, at least on large scale. There's been tear gas. We had this weird story about some guys trying to cook up chemicals, which was weird. But it's Russia has used hypersonic missiles, which are not really a dirty weapon. They're just sort of a very modern weapon system that they had to use.
No nuclear weapons have been used.
Thank God.
I think that it's still going to be fought with rather conventional weapons. Neither side has really any incentive bringing in, or Russia hasn't. Using nuclear weapons, they would most likely use their last allies or strategic allies, for example, China. So if they are, in a geopolitical sense of things, if they are only left with Belarus to
protect,
so then it's not worth it. If they can't do trade with China or other Far Eastern countries, then it might be a situation that even Russia couldn't sustain.
If Russia gets really desperate, we might start seeing, chemical weapons. Nukes are the sort of the
last resort,
thing down the line. But I don't think we are there yet, and I do think that the West and Russia have some kind of a understanding of this, these are the red lines.
The consequences are that's this is the knowledge I have of weapons. But does it exist a nuclear weapon, a small nuclear weapon?
I mean, we have tactical
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That you don't have to go kind of like Hiroshima and Nagasaki style.
I mean,
Hiroshima and
those
Nagasaki
are
are-
basically tactical nukes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Alright.
So yeah, and during the history, for example, Cold War, there have been nuclear cannons, for example. So
Davy Crockett.
Yeah, and so there have been tests with smaller nuclear weapons.
But
and
then they're still destroying. Like
yeah,
ships.
they will still
They'll be
make a
bad.
big effect.
Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
So destroy like one city in one.
I mean, we have to remember the like Hiroshima and
Nagasaki.
yeah, they were Japanese cities, which means they were mostly built out of wood.
Yeah.
And like when you basically drop a massive thermal bomb on them, that's just gonna burn it all. If you would drop one of those bombs in a let's say Helsinki, you would not take out the whole city.
Okay.
They are kind of smallish yields, but they would make a lot of damage and a lot of radiation, which even like using small nukes, actually, like the problem with these like small nukes is that they do kind of do damage, but they are also not actually powerful enough to like sort of just like destroy everything in their
Yeah.
path. You can take cover from them. You have armored vehicles that have nuclear protection if they're not in like fireball.
Yeah.
Um,
And they're shielded.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of like how to like put it. I mean, that's a line that like once you cross, even with this small weapon, there is no going back. So you can't sort of just like use tactical nukes and just like go, oh yeah, these are a part of the conventional arsenal.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
pressed the wrong button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, it could be used to terrorize civilians, of course, but
Yeah.
in the frontline use, if you launched a nuke against Ukrainian defenses, for example, then you would wipe out your own troops also. So it's
Then you have to walk into that sort of
yeah,
wasteland.
and then you have to take this radiated land. So it's they aren't really a solution for the problems that Russians have at the moment.
Because of course the assumption is that someone think clearly and rationally like we do.
Yeah.
But the idea of like what is in the head of Putin, that's a totally different story.
That's also a problem. We can't expect that Russian leaders are acting from a Western logical point of
exactly.
view.
Yeah.
For example, if we see what kind of incoherent rambles Medvedev is posting all the time to different platforms, it's
What is
surely
he putting?
it's just this long texts that are
Full of propaganda narratives and just
Yeah.
like basically
And
conspiracy theories. And
some violent fantasies, and it's
Oh,
really
yeah,
disturbing
amazing.
stuff. So and that man has been the president of Russia. So
Yes.
there can still be some factors, some variables that bad things can happen even though they don't seem to be logical. So that's why I can't count nuclear weapons out
You
completely.
cannot discard it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But is it Putin sick?
That's a great question. Do we know? There is a lot of rumors about
Is
that.
it part of the fake news?
There is a lot of rumors about that, but I don't think there is anything solid. There was something in those lovely alleged leaks about them, but the source there was basically like someone down in Ukraine going, "Please trust me, bro."
Okay.
So it's like it's
Because there has been a lot of video
There is
analysis.
a lot of
He
rumors.
walks badly
Yeah.
today. He's swollen, puffy, and how he's sitting. There has been a lot of analysis also in the Finnish tabloids.
It seems that everything is not well with Putin, but of course we have to remember that he's an old man and the life expectancy in Russia isn't that great, and also he's leading a shitty country that is having its ass kicked by what they would think an inferior army. So you know,
I wouldn't be having a
you
great-
wouldn't be happy either
Yeah.
if you were in that position.
Yeah.
And then you know that the whole structure is corrupt, and
Yes,
you
yes.
can't replace your losses, and people are dying, and you gain like one field a week. So
One
you know,
potato field.
Yeah. I would start taking drugs in that situation too. So
You should maybe rather go clubbing.
Yeah.
than
yeah.
do that.
yeah. But like, we just don't have like actual information about that. There is a lot of rumors. There is a lot of talk about that. But a lot of the Russia experts that like we have talked to just like seem to like go like,
Yeah,
who knows?
Because
Doesn't matter.
Because it almost seems that some people are counting that, okay, maybe he dies before anything bad happens, you know, like maybe that's the solution for this.
Yeah, and that's not there. There are worse people. So it's funny to say that Putin is not the worst leader that there is, but it's true. That, for example, there can be worse. So that's also a fact.
Yeah.
But Putin dying might not solve any actual problems.
Because then a maniac comes after him and
Yeah.
I mean, let's say someone who is, you know, actually fully into the whole like, you know, West is evil and like.
But Putin is
like,
an
out to get us.
ex-KGB.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a dynasty that has died already, kind of,
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of, you could consider that it's last of a kind, and the next will not be, because maybe the next already had TikTok in his phone.
that could be. And
And that's maybe what we can hope, that the next one will be more modern.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly hope for that, but it's, of course, if we have Putin live when we have a regime change, I mean, doubtful that there's gonna be anyone who is sort of not continuing with this nationalist Russian policy. And then if we have Russia, Putin dying, then what happens in Russia if there's, you know, someone who is actually like modern, Western, democratic, trying to come to power? There's a lot of institutional inertia for that. People want to stay in power, people have a lot to lose, and they don't want someone to like sort of break the system down.
Yeah, and this is something that I've been saying, that in order for Russia to become a better society, they have to feel like Germans felt or feel today about the events of the Second World War. Yeah, ashamed. They have to feel shame, and if Putin dies, I don't think that feel of shame will arise in the Russian society.
I read once one historian was writing in LinkedIn, and he was saying like, this is not a problem of Putin, let's stop it. It was quite straightforward. I'm not saying that I am this opinion. He wrote that like, problems are Russian, that this is like a story that repeats all the time, like beaten up and go down and show that communist doesn't work or this doesn't work, and then again patriotism and we are the best and we are ready to die and we don't have even potato to eat, and then bam again on the head, and it goes up and down all the same. It's kind of like, the change is not in the leadership that has happened. It has to be like more radical.
Yeah, I mean,
in this sense, maybe Germany has not been in that kind of pattern.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of was. I mean, we had the Prussian Wars, and like then we had the First World War, and then we had this. But I mean, there is certainly some like cultural institutions working there. But I'm also personally wary of this sort of historical determinism that is, you know, always going to happen. But yeah, I mean, at the moment, I do think that the like future of Russia, that's the great unknown. What is going to happen after the war? How is the war going to end? Who knows? What is going to happen after the war? What is going to happen after Putin? And it's like the West made some mistakes back in the 1990s. We didn't really help Russian sort of democratic development, and then they sort of themselves went, well, let's just have this, you know, KGB guy who was like great. But it's like the question of how do we turn Russia into a democratic nation is like something that is of course, that's a Russian problem, but it's also like a problem for the people neighboring Russia and the world players, because once that change gets underway, if it does, God help me that it gets underway someday.
And we can see it.
Yeah. Then we sort of have to be ready to like help the people who are actually doing that change.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we are just, if we don't help those people, then it's going to be like a problem where we just probably let them fall to the great waves of Russian history of this,
history
emperors
repeating.
coming in.
But Putin was shaking hands with everyone before.
Yeah.
And everyone was welcoming. So it's kind of like, okay, we've been trusting you. Now this happens, and then even if it's a change of regime and people are saying, no, we are different. Who will believe them now anymore?
Yeah, that's a good question. It from at least from my point of view, I don't think, for the question that what will happen to Russia, to Russian mentality after this war, I'd say nothing. Nothing will happen. It's I can't believe that just a war ending could change anything.
Yeah.
The Russians have ended multiple wars after the fall of the Soviet Union, and things have only turned to the worse. Actually,
absolutely.
I want to offer you a more bright future view. Because Emil, I think you are quite
He's
sharp.
a bit of a doomer.
Yeah, but because all those wars, the communication and the international exposure Russia had was not parallel to what we have now. Because then if institutions like social media channels, communication channels and traveling and all that will be put back together as it was before and incentivate, people will learn other ways. And of course there is an old generation of grandmas and grandpas that still they want their kids, they are ready to starve if their kids are going to war. But those people are dying. I mean, isn't there maybe a shift in this?
We can hope.
Oh, at least this is my bright future.
I mean, we can hope. Of course, a lot of the young people who were maybe ready for that change have now left the country.
Yes, because after the recruitment, many people fled.
Yeah, which is like a problem, like the people who either can't leave or they don't want to leave stay, that's a problem for the future. But there is hope to be had, I think, even if it's hard to see. But I don't think that this war itself is maybe going to change that much. Then again, Afghan war back in, ending in 1989 did sort of help, bring down the Soviet Union. So there's that. But there's not gonna be a Germany 1945 moment because countries get nukes so that no one can Germany 1945 them.
Yeah. Let's see if it settles somewhere in between
hopefully.
Emil and me, because it's true. Also, you see maybe young people or young Russian participating in competition and making gestures or being really patriotist. So then there is also this that can be actually turned upside down, as you were saying, John. That like frequently after a war, then nationalisms bloom.
Yeah.
So then we will get the situation in which Putin goes down, and then actually nationalism grows more than before.
Yeah, that is a possibility, which is a very, very worrying possibility.
But I can also see some positive. If, for example, if after the war the Russian armed forces are in shambles, they are in no position of attacking anyone. In that case, they could realize that there's some internal issues to be solved, and well, that can lead to some internal. I don't know how would it be a conflict, but adjustment. So at least that could be good. And there has of course been a democratic opposition in Russia, and these NGOs that are working for a better society. So that's still something that.
But still, they put the opposition into jail and they try
so that's
to poison them. So
it's
not going maybe further. But can then a revolution, an internal revolution, take away Putin? Also, like the same military complex after being beaten and sent to death, Can you see
If
that
they
either
do-
people
yeah.
or military complex can rebel?
Yeah, I mean,
Is that a way scenario?
I mean,
where-
like, military can, but if we get a, military junta, then I don't think that, like, things are gonna get better. People rising up, well, maybe not in the next couple of years, but I mean, we can be hopeful, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and in order for the military to do some kind of a revolution, it should mean that for the leading people, revolution would mean a brighter future for at least for the individual. So if they are okay with the system now, they aren't naive in a way that a revolution changes everything and after we do a revolution then there's free ponies for everyone. That's not like the thing. So as long as the military is happy enough for the status quo, nothing is going to happen. And I don't think that we are in a World War I situation yet where the Russian society
desperate.
and the military is so desperate that
Yeah.
it would crumble.
Because money still flows to the
Yeah.
generals and to the complex.
Yeah.
But what do you think that the Finnish-Russian part of Finland, the people that they are half and half, do you know what is their feeling and their like how they feel this war, and what is their, well, hard to say opinion, but how do you think this community has been behaving?
I have actually from a rather close perspective on this. There are people that this can be a conflict even between families. For example, I know this case where these grandparents are pro-Putin and then the younger ones are against the war and
Yes.
against Putin, and that's a huge issue for them, and has practically is a fight between these
family,
people,
yeah.
in between the family. Yes, so it's kind of tragic also that, but that also shows that not every single Russian is the same, and there are individuals can have different opinions, and that's also something that has to be remembered, that you should never generalize.
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah,
But this also tells me this, that like old generation, they maybe still source information from Mother
Yeah.
Russia, and
Yeah.
then like the youngest have
Yeah.
their eyes have been opened to something that can be different. And
Yeah,
like,
Yeah.
you don't have to
like
struggle.
a lot of Russians who live, well, in other places than like Russia, they do follow Russian media, which does give them Russian media narratives. Younger people tend to follow Western media more, tend to understand how the Western media works better. But yeah, there are certainly conflicts. And then we have the problem of this, like, Finnish people, or this, like, people like in the West acting really racist towards these Russian Russian speakers, which is also like horrifying, because most of these people, they are decent people, they are often on our side in this, and it's just like, who are you helping by like sort of being racist
Yeah.
towards the like Russian speakers here, and it's just really horrifying to like look at that
absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah, and it's also sad that because some people are doing that, then it some Russians can think that, for example, me and John would be
Yeah,
the
that
same.
everyone is the same. Yeah,
I've actually encountered that myself. One person has asked from another person that I know that I think that Emil hates Russians, and that's not the case. It's like
You hate other people. But
Yeah,
you don't-
I hate I hate a lot of individuals, but I do not
Yeah,
hate
Full
people.
race.
Yeah, so that's not something that I do.
Yeah. And I mean, hating like the Russian speakers only plays to like Putin's hands.
Yeah,
That is his
absolutely.
whole like
It's
sort of
against-
narrative that like West hates us, West hates Russians, West hates you.
yeah.
And if we are racist, if we are sort of putting them all into the same box of
Yeah.
evil bad Russians, that is
then the
only
propaganda
helping Putin.
is it's
Yeah,
correct. Yeah. But what is the role of China in all this?
China is the strategic partner of Russia,
But they don't really want to be.
Yeah, they don't
kind of
really.
like shady.
Yeah, that's why I say the strategic partner.
Yeah.
It's not like a partner. Actually, it's not an ally.
Yeah. I don't think China likes that the war has dragged on this far. China probably wanted the sort of short, clean war that Russia was going for. China's sort of it has trade with the West. It has a lot of political ties into the West, and it doesn't want to rock that boat at least right now. But then it also needs Russia to sort of be this counterbalance in Europe. So it can't just, throw it to the wolves. So China probably has a bit of a problem here where it needs to support Russia, in some ways, but it needs to also look to the West, and it doesn't really care about the war because it's not, Russia's war.
They just want Russia to be eliminated.
Well, they maybe just want the war to be over. It's let's just calm down.
Yeah, I don't really think that China actually cares that much about who wins the war in Ukraine.
But they took a statement anyway, being more supportive to Russia. So they kind of chose which side they want to belong to.
Yeah, that's true. I think that China is less, in this case, they are acting less on a value-based thing. They are more looking at the geopolitical situation.
Yeah.
And Russia is their neighboring country, and Ukraine is a country really far away. So there's these geographical things, geopolitical facts.
And it's Russia is this actor causing United States and NATO grief down in Europe, which is far away from China, which is great for Russia, but it's also this war is really hurting all of the global politics. So it just would be better if it wasn't on anymore.
And China is anyway most likely also driving their own interest of economic interest of keeping trades and because those neighbors are important. Indeed,
and this doesn't help the situation.
No. For sure, it's not giving extra boost. But what is the scenario in which Finland should be worried about Finland?
Well, at the moment, I don't think that there are relevant military threats. Russia is 100% tied to Ukraine.
Yeah.
It doesn't look for a conflict, especially with a NATO and EU country.
No, Russian army is in shambles.
Yeah.
It is going to take at least
years.
5, 7, 10 years to build any of that back up. There is going to be a time of relative ease, I think, for us, where it's Russia has to rebuild, Russia has to rethink a lot of things. Yeah. And let's see. I mean, who would have thought 10 years ago that Russia's going into Ukraine like this?
Yeah.
So come the 5 to 10 years, who knows what has happened?
Yeah.
But at least in next few years, I think we are relatively safe.
10 years ago, Crimea hasn't happened, and 10 years ago there was no war in Donbass. So 10 years
it's a long term, but can this become the same kind of Crimea that it's a standstill and nothing happens for long?
Absolutely. Which I think that's what Russia maybe wants at the moment.
What's the advantage? What do they get out of it?
Well, Ukraine can't really join Western institutions when there's a war going on. Ukraine can't join NATO. Ukraine has to spend resources into the war. As I said, this is existential for them. If they did not get Western money flowing in there, their whole economy would basically collapse immediately.
There were some calculation of how much does the war per day cost in Ukraine. It was something astronomical, 6 million a day.
It is ridiculous. At the moment, they have to at least like 25 to 30% of their national budget is going just for this war
Directly, yeah.
and then of course all the
But those
indirect
yeah.
things on top of that.
And then they don't have people working the fields, or they don't have the
Yeah.
same income, so it's just going down.
Yeah.
Of
yeah.
course,
And
Europe,
that's-
it's pushing money, pumping money in.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that won't last forever if the situation gets frozen. So
Yeah.
at some point, the Westerners might think that well, the help will decrease, and then Ukraine has to think that if they continue the war, then they will have to pay a huge amount of money, and if they there's no really good options for them at that point.
Yeah, which is why Russia wants to sort of keep it up.
Yeah.
Russia knows that this is a war of attrition, and they have the men to like keep it up, but they might not have the machines to like really keep it up forever. We will see about that, come like summer. But I think that is the big reason why like everyone's also waiting for this Ukrainian counter-offensive, is that it is sort of Europe is running out of stuff to give them. Like in terms of tanks, in terms of artillery. USA has some, but it doesn't have unlimited stocks, and it like doesn't just want to dump all of that down in Ukraine. So it's sort of everyone's waiting to see what happens. Can Ukraine use the stuff that like has been given to like great effect? If they can, maybe we can keep on giving them money, keep on giving them stuff.
And see the finishing coming closer.
Whereas if it just doesn't go anywhere, then there is absolutely going to be, I think, like push for some kind of settlement. I think in the end this is
shaking
going
hands.
In the end this is going to end in some kind of negotiations, but the like question is, what is the situation when that happens?
How much land will Ukraine lose? I personally think that Ukraine will lose some land, and now we are just checking how much land will it lose.
Okay, let's make a bet. Not a bet only because we're playing on others people's shoulder. But what is, Emil? How do you think this will end, and when?
They will fight all throughout this year. I'm pretty sure of that, and I doubt that, or at least getting Crimea back will be a huge effort, and I'm not sure that they can liberate all the other territories and on top of that also get Crimea back. That's because they at the moment they struggle with even some minor cities and so on. So, well, I do not know what kind of reserves they are stacking up, what kind of new brigades they are forming, but I'm afraid that this will not end in a complete victory for Ukraine, where they get all of their terrain liberated.
So they will have to give up some territories, and it will take 1 to 2 years.
Yes, it's really hard because a lot of stuff is depending on the future events, future offensives. So if they completely fail, then it might not take that long, and if they get at least some success, then the war can drag on for years. So I won't be saying any particular years, because I will be eventually wrong if I do that.
Yeah. I mean, like a wiser man than like me told me that you should never make predictions as an expert, because you will always be wrong. But I do think that it's sort of going to die down towards the winter. Both sides are absolutely exhausted, probably by like.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and it's like, depending on the success of these, operations, well, it might drag on. If it is very, very good for the Ukrainians, but I do think that it's more likely to be going to be sort of frozen during the winter, and then we are sort of starting to see those negotiations. But what might happen is that even if we sort of get that handshake there, that is sort of going to simmer on these, like, front lines that are then where it's sort of frozen, just as it did from 2015 to 2022, and then 5-10 years later there's just gonna be
again,
which is great.
Yeah. Okay, we will then call back in a couple of years and see see how it goes. So more than 2 hours, we got a lot to fit in this. Thank you so much for how professional and knowledgeable you are. Hopefully we covered a lot, maybe not so much of the events, but there is a lot of content in here.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.